At 3 in the morning, when most of the world sleeps in ignorant peace, Tessa Vale drags herself through the door of an all-night diner, blood seeping through her shirt, ribs screaming with every breath. The man who did this, her landlord, her predator, walks free while she can barely stand. But tonight, someone is watching. Someone who doesn't forgive. Someone who will make him pay in ways the law never could. This is the story of how a broken waitress became a survivor, and how a ruthless crime boss chose mercy over violence for the first time in his brutal life. If you want to see justice served and lives rebuilt from ashes, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Quote, the Sterling Diner sat on the edge of Route 9 like a forgotten relic, its neon sign flickering against the darkness of early morning. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune, casting harsh shadows across red vinyl booths and a counter that had seen better decades. At this hour, the place hosted only insomniacs, truckers, and those with nowhere else to go. Dominic Varela occupied the corner booth, his back to the wall, always to the wall. His coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he didn't signal for a refill. He never did. The waitress knew better than to approach unless summoned. At 42, Dominic carried himself with the kind of stillness that made people nervous, the kind that suggested violence lived just beneath a carefully maintained surface. His tailored black coat hung on the hook beside him, and even at this ungodly hour, his white shirt remained crisp, his dark hair perfectly combed back. Across from him sat Marcus Reeves, his oldest friend, and the closest thing he had to a conscience, though that wasn't saying much. The Patterson situation is handled, Marcus said quietly, sliding a manila envelope across the table. He won't be a problem anymore. Dominic didn't open it. He never needed to verify Marcus's work. And his family? Relocated. New identities? They don't know who funded it. Marcus paused, studying his friend's impassive face. You're getting soft, Dom. I'm getting strategic, Dominic corrected, his voice low and measured. Dead men create martyrs. Disappeared men create questions that eventually stop being asked. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat as the diner's door swung open with such force it slammed against the interior wall. The sound shattered the 3 a.m. quiet like a gunshot. Every head in the diner turned toward the entrance, where a young woman stood swaying in the doorway, one hand pressed against the frame for support, the other clutched to her ribs. Her waitress uniform, different from this diner's, Dominic noted automatically, was torn at the shoulder, the white fabric stained dark in places that made his jaw tighten. Her face was a canvas of fresh bruises, one eye swollen nearly shut, her lips split and bleeding. But it was her eyes, the one that could still open fully, that struck him. Not the physical damage, but the look in them. The kind of terror that came from knowing that safety was a lie, that help wouldn't come, that screaming only made it worse. She took one step forward into the light, and her legs gave out. Dominic was moving before she hit the ground, his body reacting with a speed that contradicted his usual calculated stillness. He caught her before her knees cracked against the tile floor, his arms steadying her weight as gently as a man like him could manage. I've got you, he said, the words foreign in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd offered comfort instead of threats. Up close, he could see more damage. Defensive wounds on her forearms, finger-shaped bruises around her throat. The way she held her ribs suggested broken bones, not just bruising. This wasn't a fight. This was a sustained assault. Please, she whispered, the word barely audible through her split lip. Please, I need… Marcus, Dominic called without looking away from her face. Call Dr. Reeves, now. Tell him it's urgent and personal. The diner had gone completely silent. The late-night cook stood frozen at the grill, spatula in hand. The 2 truckers at the counter stared openly. Even the jukebox seemed to sense the moment, having finished its song and not started another. Let's get you sitting down, Dominic said, his voice gentler than anyone in that room had ever heard it. He helped her to his booth, Marcus sliding out quickly to make room. She moved like every inch of her body was screaming, but she didn't cry out. That told him something too. She'd learned that crying out only made things worse. As he eased her into the booth, her uniform shirt shifted and he caught sight of what looked like a boot print bruised into her ribs. His hands stilled for just a fraction of a second, and something cold and sharp crystallized in his chest. "What's your name?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her while Marcus moved to the counter, phone already to his ear. "Tessa." Her voice was hoarse, damaged. "Tessa Vale." "I'm Dominic." He didn't offer his last name. People in this town either knew it already or were better off not knowing. "Can you tell me who did this to you?" She flinched at the question, her good eye darting to the door as if expecting someone to burst through it. I shouldn't have come here. He'll find out. He always finds out." "No one is going to hurt you here," Dominic said, and the absolute certainty in his voice made her focus on him fully for the first time. "I promise you that, but I need you to tell me who did this." Tessa's hand shook as she pulled them away from her ribs, revealing the extent of the damage. Her breathing was shallow, careful. "My landlord, Harold Pike. I couldn't make rent. I was short $50. Just 50. He said." She stopped, her throat working around words that wouldn't come. "Take your time," Dominic said, his voice still gentle, though inside him something cold and ancient was waking up. He'd built his empire on violence, yes, but it had always been violence with purpose. This was something else. This was cruelty for the sake of cruelty. "He said I could work it off." The words came out broken, shameful, though Dominic could see in her eyes that the shame belonged to the monster who'd hurt her, not to her. "I said no. I told him I'd have the money in 3 days. I just got a new shift. I could pay. But he said no one tells him no. He came to my apartment tonight and..." She stopped again, and this time tears did fall, though she tried desperately to hold them back. "He beat you," Dominic finished quietly, "for saying no to something you had every right to refuse." "He said next time he'd make sure I couldn't work at all," Tessa whispered. "He said no one would believe me, that he owns half the cops in this town, and the ones he doesn't own wouldn't care about some broke waitress with an attitude. He said I should be grateful he was willing to forget the debt. If I just..." Her voice broke entirely then, and she pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle the sound. Marcus returned to the table, his expression grim. "Doc's on his way. 10 minutes. Dominic nodded once, his eyes never leaving Tessa's face. "What you did tonight, coming here, asking for help, that took more courage than you know. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand me?" "I don't have anyone," she said, the admission carrying the weight of profound loneliness. "My family's in Oregon. I came here for college, but had to drop out when my mom got sick. Sent all my money home for her treatment. I've been working double shifts just to keep a roof over my head, and now I don't even have that because I can't go back there. He has keys. He can come in whenever he wants." The cold thing in Dominic's chest expanded, spreading through his veins like frost. "Harold Pike, does he own the apartment building on Garrett Street?" Tessa looked up sharply, surprised. "You know it?" "I know everything that happens in this town," Dominic said simply, "including which landlords are pieces of shit and which ones are monsters. I didn't know Pike had crossed into the latter category. That's a mistake I intend to correct." Something in his tone made Tessa study him more carefully, despite her pain. You're not just some guy having coffee, are you?" "No," Dominic said honestly. "I'm not. But right now, what I am is the person who's going to make sure you're safe and that Harold Pike pays for what he did. Not just to you, to everyone he's hurt." "There are others?" The question came out small, horrified. "There are always others," Marcus said quietly from where he stood guard by the booth. "Men like that don't stop at one victim." The diner's door opened again, and an older man in his 60s entered carrying a worn leather medical bag. Dr. Lawrence Reeves had been patching up Dominic's people for 20 years, ever since Dominic had saved his daughter from a trafficking ring. He asked no questions and kept no records, but his work was impeccable. "Mr. Varela," he greeted Dominic with a nod, then turned his full attention to Tessa. His professional mask slipped slightly when he saw the extent of her injuries, his mouth tightening into a grim line. "Young lady, I'm Dr. Reeves. I'm going to examine you and treat your injuries. Is that all right?" Tessa looked to Dominic, seeking permission or reassurance. He wasn't sure which. He gave her the smallest nod. "Okay," she whispered. Dr. Reeves set his bag on the table and pulled out a stethoscope. "I need to look at your ribs." That's where the most serious damage appears to be. Dominic, Marcus, give us some privacy. Dominic stood but didn't move away from the booth. We'll be right over there, he told Tessa, gesturing to a booth across the aisle. You call out if you need anything. As the doctor began his careful examination, Dominic and Marcus settled into the opposite booth, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. You're thinking about killing him, Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. I'm thinking about worse than killing him, Dominic replied, his voice devoid of emotion. Killing would be mercy. Dom, you don't even know this girl. I don't need to know her to know she didn't deserve this. Dominic watched as Dr. Reeves gently palpated Tessa's ribs, watched her bite down on her lip to keep from crying out. And I don't need to know Harold Pike personally to know exactly what kind of monster beats a woman half to death over $50. If you go after Pike, you're going to step on some toes. He's connected. Connected to who? Marcus hesitated. The Byrne family. Dominic's eyes narrowed. The Byrnes ran the South Side, controlled most of the protection rackets and loan sharking in the lower-income neighborhoods. Dominic's territory was the docks, the high-end clubs, the lucrative import-export business that asked no questions. Their paths rarely crossed, and both families preferred it that way. Why would the Byrnes protect a landlord? Not protect, employ. Pike manages properties the Byrnes own through shell companies. He collects rent, handles evictions, keeps the tenants scared and quiet. From what I've heard, he's very good at the last part. And when he assaults women in buildings he manages, the Byrnes look the other way. Bad for business to care about that sort of thing. Marcus leaned forward. Dom, I know that look. I know what you're planning. But this is different from our usual cleanup work. This is personal. You're letting emotion drive you. Maybe emotion is exactly what's needed here. Dominic's gaze remained fixed on Tessa, who was now being wrapped in bandages by the doctor. How many, Marcus? How many women do you think Harold Pike has hurt? I don't know. Find out. The command was quiet, but absolute. I want every victim, every complaint, every whispered story. I want to know exactly how deep this goes. And then what? And then I'm going to make sure it never happens again. Dr. Reeves finished his examination and crossed to their booth, his expression grave. 3 broken ribs, extensive bruising, possible concussion, lacerations that needed closing. Someone beat this girl with their fists and their feet, systematically. This wasn't rage. This was calculated punishment. Will she be all right? Dominic asked. Physically, with rest and proper care, yes. Psychologically, the doctor trailed off, shaking his head. That's not my area of expertise, but trauma like this leaves scars that don't show up on x-rays. What does she need? Rest, pain management, a safe place to heal where she doesn't have to worry about her attacker finding her. And eventually, therapy, though I doubt she can afford it. Cost isn't a concern, Dominic said. Whatever she needs, she gets. Send the bills to me. Dr. Reeves studied him for a long moment. You're planning something. I'm planning justice, the kind the courts won't deliver. Just try to remember she's a victim, not a chess piece in whatever game you're about to play. I know exactly what she is, Doctor. That's why I'm doing this. After Dr. Reeves left, Dominic returned to the booth where Tessa sat, wrapped in bandages, clutching a bottle of water. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, though he suspected that fragility was an illusion. Anyone who could drag themselves to safety with broken ribs had steel in their spine. The doctor says you need rest and time to heal, Dominic said, sliding into the seat across from her. You can't go back to your apartment. Pike has keys and you're in no condition to defend yourself if he comes back. I don't have anywhere else to go, Tessa said softly. I spent my last money on the bus that got me here. I don't even know where here is. I just got on and rode until I couldn't stand the pain anymore. You're about 15 miles from your apartment, Marcus supplied. You picked a good place to get off. Dominic pulled out his phone and typed a quick message. I have a property, a safe house where we keep witnesses and people who need protection. It's secure, fully furnished, and no one knows about it except my most trusted people. You'll stay there while you heal. I can't afford... I'm not asking you to pay, Dominic interrupted. I'm offering you safety. That's not for sale. Tessa's good eye filled with fresh tears. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. It was a fair question, one Dominic wasn't entirely sure how to answer. Why was he helping her? He'd walked past suffering before. Hell, he'd caused suffering before. His entire empire was built on exploiting weaknesses and capitalizing on desperation. But something about the way she'd looked standing in that doorway, broken but still standing, terrified but still seeking help, had cracked something open in him that he'd thought was sealed shut years ago. Let's just say I don't like bullies, he finally said. And I especially don't like men who hurt women. Are you going to kill him? The question was direct, her gaze steady despite everything she'd been through. Dominic could have lied, should have lied, but he'd promised himself years ago that he'd never disrespect someone by insulting their intelligence. I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again, he said carefully. What that looks like will depend on what I learn about him. But death is quick. Death is mercy. And I'm not feeling particularly merciful right now. Tessa held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. Because he doesn't deserve mercy. The things he said he'd do to me if I told anyone. The things he implied he'd already done to other girls. You'll tell me everything, Dominic said. Every detail you remember, every threat he made, every name he dropped. But not tonight. Tonight, you rest. A black SUV pulled up outside the diner and Marcus stood. That's our ride. Dominic helped Tessa to her feet, supporting her weight as they made their way to the door. The early morning air was cold, and she shivered despite the shock blanket Dr. Reeves had wrapped around her shoulders. Where are we going? She asked as Marcus held the SUV door open. Somewhere safe, Dominic assured her. Somewhere Harold Pike and anyone connected to him will never find you. The drive took 20 minutes, winding through industrial areas and eventually into a quiet residential neighborhood that looked deceptively normal. The safe house was a modest 2-story home with a privacy fence and a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. Inside, Marcus gave a quick tour while Dominic made calls in the kitchen. Bedroom upstairs, bathrooms there, kitchen stocked. Security cameras cover every angle outside. Panic button in every room links directly to Dominic's phone. You press it, we come running. Tessa sank onto the couch, exhaustion finally overwhelming her adrenaline. This is too much. I don't deserve... Stop, Dominic said, entering the living room. You didn't deserve to be beaten half to death. You didn't deserve to be terrorized in your own home. You didn't deserve any of what happened to you. This is just basic human decency. And the fact that it feels like too much tells me how badly the world has failed you. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. You need to rest and heal. Everything else we'll handle. He set a card on the coffee table. That's my personal number. You call it if you need anything, day or night. What happens now? Now you sleep. Tomorrow, when you're ready, you'll tell me everything you know about Harold Pike. And then I'm going to do what I do best. Solve problems. By making them disappear? By making sure they never become problems for anyone else again. After they left Tessa at the safe house with one of Dominic's most trusted guards outside, Marcus drove them back toward the city center as dawn began to break over the horizon. You're going to war over a waitress you met 3 hours ago, Marcus observed. I'm going to war over a principal, Dominic corrected. Today it's Tessa. Yesterday it was someone else. Tomorrow it'll be another victim. Pike isn't an isolated incident. He's a symptom of a system that protects predators and abandons victims. That system exists because people like me let it exist. You're not responsible for every piece of human garbage in this city. No, but I'm responsible for the ones operating under protection I could remove. Dominic stared out the window at the waking city. The Burns protect Pike because he makes them money and keeps their tenants scared. I'm going to make it clear that protecting him is more expensive than cutting him loose. And if they refuse, then I'll remind them why people fear the name Varela. Marcus pulled up to Dominic's downtown penthouse, the building that served as both his home and the unofficial headquarters of his operation. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, even if it's messy, even if it costs us. Dominic stepped out of the vehicle, then paused, looking back at his oldest friend. Find out everything, every property Pike manages, every woman he's targeted, every complaint that got buried. I want the full picture before I make my move. You'll have it by tonight. As Dominic rode the elevator to the penthouse, he caught his reflection in the polished metal doors. He looked tired, older than his 42 years. The life he'd chosen had carved hard lines into his face, had turned his eyes cold and calculating. But tonight, when he'd caught Tessa as she fell, when he'd promised her safety, for just a moment, he'd felt something other than the constant low-grade anger that fueled his existence. He'd felt purpose, real purpose, not just the endless chess game of criminal enterprise. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe he was getting soft. Or maybe, for the first time in years, he was finally becoming something more than just a well-dressed monster. The penthouse was dark and silent, the way he preferred it. Dominic poured himself a drink he wouldn't finish and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake up beneath him. Somewhere out there, Harold Pike was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in his untouchability, secure in the knowledge that the system protected men like him. That confidence would be shattered soon enough. Dominic pulled out his phone and opened a secure messaging app, typing a single message to his information broker. Harold Pike, every detail, every secret, every sin. I want his entire life mapped out by tonight. The response came back within seconds. Already on it. Marcus gave me the heads up. This one's going to be ugly, boss. Good, Dominic typed back. Ugly means evidence. Evidence means leverage. And leverage means I can destroy him without firing a single shot. He set the phone down and returned his gaze to the city. The sun was fully up now, painting the buildings in shades of gold and orange. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But Dominic knew better. Beneath that beautiful surface, predators like Harold Pike operated with impunity, protected by corruption and indifference. The Tessa Vales of the world were expected to suffer in silence, to accept that justice was a luxury they couldn't afford. Well, Dominic could afford it, and he was going to pay for it in blood, money, and whatever else it took to make sure Harold Pike's reign of terror ended. Not because he was a good man, he'd never pretended to be that, but because even monsters could draw lines, even devils could have principles, and Harold Pike had crossed both. By noon, Dominic's phone was vibrating with incoming reports. He'd managed 3 hours of restless sleep before the information started flooding in, each message darker than the last. He sat at his desk, reading through the files Marcus and his information broker had compiled, and with each page, the cold thing in his chest grew colder. Harold Pike wasn't just a predator, he was a system. The first file contained property records. Pike didn't own the buildings he managed. Those belonged to shell corporations traced back to the Buren family. But he had complete operational control. 17 apartment buildings scattered across the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Over 300 units, rent collected in cash, repairs perpetually delayed, complaints systematically ignored. The second file was worse. Jesus Christ, Dominic muttered, scanning through incident reports that had been mysteriously closed, witness statements that had disappeared, complaints to the police that had resulted in nothing but victim intimidation. The pattern was unmistakable. Harold Pike had been doing this for years, and every time someone tried to stop him, the system protected him. His phone rang. Marcus. Tell me you're reading these files, Marcus said without preamble. I'm reading them. How many women? That we can confirm? 11. That we suspect? Probably triple that. Most won't talk. They're too scared, too broke, or they've already left town trying to escape. Dominic closed his eyes, pressing his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. 11 confirmed victims, and nobody stopped him. The ones who went to the police got nowhere. 2 filed formal reports. Both were visited by officers who strongly suggested they reconsider their accusations. One of those women moved to another state 3 days later. The other one, Marcus paused. She ended up in the hospital 2 weeks after filing, fell down the stairs according to the report. Except her building doesn't have stairs. Names. I want the names of every cop who buried this. Already compiled. Sending the list now. But Dom, this goes higher than beat cops. Pike has a detective on his payroll, Vincent Caruso. Works in property crimes, conveniently positioned to make sure any complaints about Pike get lost in the system. Dominic's jaw tightened. Caruso. He knew that name. The detective had approached him years ago, looking to supplement his income by providing information about police movements. Dominic had declined the offer, Dirty cops were useful, but ones willing to sell information to the highest bidder were liabilities. Now he knew what Caruso had been doing with his flexible morality. What about the Burns? Do they know what Pike's been doing? They know, Marcus confirmed, his voice grim. I talked to Jimmy Chen. He does bookkeeping for one of their front companies. He says Thomas Byrne got a complaint about Pike 2 years ago. Some tenant advocate group tried to organize, wanted to report him for harassment and unsafe living conditions. Thomas's response was to have Pike evict every person who signed the complaint letter. 32 families out on the street in the middle of winter. And nobody did anything? Who is going to? These are people living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have lawyers. They don't have resources. They barely have hope. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Pike targets women specifically, single mothers, immigrants, anyone without family or support systems. He waits until they're behind on rent, then offers them his solution. The ones who refuse get evicted or worse. The ones who agree, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Dominic stood, walking to the windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there, Harold Pike was going about his day, collecting rent, making threats, destroying lives. And somewhere else, Tessa Vale was lying in a safe-house bed, her ribs wrapped in bandages, trying to process the fact that she'd been beaten half to death for the crime of saying no. Set up a meeting with Thomas Byrne, Dominic said. Tonight, neutral ground. Tell him I want to discuss a mutual problem. He's going to know this is about Pike. Good. Let him prepare his justifications. I want to hear him try to defend keeping a rabid dog on a leash. After Marcus hung up, Dominic made another call. Dr. Reeves, how's our patient? Resting, finally. I checked on her this morning. She barely slept, kept waking up in panic. But the guard you posted has been helpful. His presence seems to calm her. I'm going to need you to do something else for me, Dominic said. I need documentation. Medical records for Tessa and any other victims you can examine. I need it thorough and I need it legal. Something that could hold up in court if necessary. You're actually thinking about going through proper channels? I'm thinking about having every option available, but I need evidence that can't be dismissed or buried. I'll handle it, though I have to ask, when you say other victims, how many are we talking about? Potentially dozens. I'm working on getting them to come forward. Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment. Dominic, what you're doing, it's good, but be careful. Men like Pike don't operate in a vacuum. Taking him down means exposing everyone who enabled him. I'm counting on it. The meeting with Thomas Byrne was set for 11 p.m. at a restaurant the Byrne family owned, an upscale Italian place that closed to the public at 10. Dominic arrived exactly on time, Marcus at his side, both men dressed in dark suits that might as well have been armor. Thomas Byrne was already seated at a corner table, flanked by his own lieutenant, a thick-necked enforcer named Danny Rourke. Thomas was 58, silver-haired and distinguished-looking in the way that men who'd spent decades in organized crime often were, the violence hidden beneath expensive tailoring and practiced charm. Dominic Varela, Thomas greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. To what do I owe the pleasure? We don't usually run in the same circles. No, we don't, Dominic agreed, taking the seat across from him. You run the south side, I run the docks and the downtown business. We've maintained a comfortable distance. And yet here you are. Thomas poured himself a glass of wine from the bottle on the table. Marcus mentioned something about a mutual problem. I'm curious what problem we could possibly share. Harold Pike. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Harold manages some properties for me. What about him? He's a rapist and a predator, and you've been protecting him for years. The words landed like a grenade on the table. Danny Rourke's hand moved toward his jacket, but a single look from Thomas stopped him. Those are serious accusations, Thomas said carefully. Do you have proof? Dominic slid a folder across the table. Medical records. Police reports that mysteriously went nowhere. Witness statements. Financial records showing payments from Pike to Detective Vincent Caruso. And that's just what we compiled in 12 hours. Give me a week and I could probably fill this entire restaurant. Thomas opened the folder, scanning the contents with an expression that remained frustratingly neutral. Even if all this is true, and I'm not saying it is, what makes this my problem? Because Pike works for you. These women live in buildings you own, and when they tried to get help, your people shut them down. Dominic leaned forward. Last night, Harold Pike beat a 24-year-old waitress half to death because she couldn't make rent. 3 broken ribs, extensive bruising, multiple lacerations. Her crime was being $50 short and refusing to pay it off on her back. That's unfortunate, Thomas said, and the casual dismissal in his tone made Dominic's hands curl into fists beneath the table. But I don't micromanage my property managers. If Pike overstepped... Overstepped? Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. He's been overstepping for years. You got a complaint 2 years ago, and your response was to evict 32 families in the middle of winter. Thomas closed the folder, his pleasant expression finally slipping into something harder. Let me be clear about something, Dominic. I run a business. Pike keeps my properties occupied and my rent collected. What he does to make that happen is his business, not mine. Well, it became your business the moment you started protecting him from consequences. I haven't protected anyone. If these women had legitimate complaints, they should have gone to the police. They did, Dominic said coldly, and your pet detective buried every single one. Caruso's on your payroll, Thomas. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. The 2 men stared at each other across the table, the air thick with unspoken threats. Finally, Thomas sat back, swirling his wine. Let's say hypothetically that everything in this folder is true. What exactly do you want me to do about it? Cut him loose, fire him, remove your protection. Let me handle the rest. And why would I do that? Pike's been good for business. Because I'm asking nicely, Dominic said. And because if you refuse, I'll make it my mission to expose every piece of this operation. The shell companies, the bribed cops, the systematic exploitation. I'll bring enough attention to your Southside operations that you'll spend the next 5 years dealing with investigations instead of making money. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You're threatening to go to the feds? That's not how this world works, Dominic. We don't rat, even on scum like Pike. I'm not talking about the feds. I'm talking about the media, about activist groups, about making enough noise that even the most corrupt officials can't ignore it. You want to protect a rapist? Fine. But you'll do it in the spotlight, and we'll see how your other business partners feel about that kind of attention. Danny Rourke leaned forward, his voice a low growl. You're playing a dangerous game, Varela. No, Dominic said, his gaze never leaving Thomas. Harold Pike played a dangerous game when he decided to prey on vulnerable women. I'm just changing the rules. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying Dominic's face. You're serious about this? You'd actually start a war over some waitress you don't even know. I'd start a war over the principle that men like Pike don't get to operate with impunity just because they're useful to men like you. Dominic's voice was ice. You have 24 hours to decide. Cut him loose, or I start making calls. And if I cut him loose, what happens to Pike? That's not your concern anymore. Thomas smiled, but there was no humor in it. You're going to kill him. I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. What that looks like is my business. Fair enough. Thomas stood, buttoning his jacket. I'll give you my answer by tomorrow night. But Dominic, don't mistake my consideration for weakness. If you come at my operations over this, I will respond. Proportionally. I'd expect nothing less. After the Burns left, Marcus exhaled slowly. That went better than expected. I thought for sure Rourke was going to pull his gun. Thomas is a businessman first, Dominic said. He'll cut Pike loose because protecting him has become more expensive than cutting him loose. The question is whether he warns Pike first. You want me to put surveillance on Pike? Already done. I had a team in place before we even got here. If Pike so much as thinks about running, we'll know. They returned to Dominic's penthouse, where more files waited. His information broker had been busy, compiling a list of every woman who'd filed a complaint against Pike, every tenant who'd been mysteriously evicted, every suspicious incident in buildings Pike managed. But it was the personal file on Harold Pike himself that made Dominic's blood run cold. Pike was 52, never married, no children. He lived alone in a house he owned outright, bought with cash 15 years ago, well above what his official salary as a property manager should have allowed. His bank records showed regular cash deposits, none large enough to trigger automatic reporting, but adding up to significant sums over time. But it was the photographs that told the real story. His broker had included surveillance photos taken over the past week, Pike entering and leaving the apartment buildings he managed, always with keys jangling from his belt. Pike having coffee with Detective Caruso at a diner on the east side. Pike at a bar, drunk and loud, bragging to the bartender about keeping his tenants in line. And one photo, taken just that afternoon, of Pike entering the apartment building where Tessa had lived. Dominic's phone buzzed. A text from his surveillance team. Target entered Garrett Street building, went to Unit 3C Vale's former apartment, inside for 20 minutes, came out carrying a box of belongings. He was erasing evidence, or stealing what little Tessa had left. Dominic made a decision. He couldn't wait for Thomas Burns' answer. Every hour Pike remained free was another hour he could hurt someone else, destroy more evidence, or run. Marcus, call the team. I want Pike picked up tonight. Dom, if you move before Byrne gives his answer, I don't care. Pike goes into the box where Tessa's things were, and I want to know what he took. Then I want him in a location where we can have a conversation without interruptions. The warehouse on Pier 7? Perfect. Soundproof, isolated, and we own it. Have the team bring him there within the hour. Marcus hesitated. You're sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. While Marcus coordinated the pickup, Dominic drove to the safe house to check on Tessa. He found her sitting in the living room, staring at the television without really watching it. She'd showered and changed into clean clothes his people had provided, but the bruises on her face had darkened overnight, making the damage even more visible. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or trust, or both. How are you feeling? He asked, taking the chair across from her. Like I got hit by a truck, she said, attempting a smile that turned into a wince. The doctor came by this morning. He said, I'm healing as well as can be expected. That's good. I wanted to update you on what's happening. Dominic leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I met with the people who've been protecting Harold Pike. I made it clear that protection is ending. Tessa's breath caught. What did they say? They're considering it, but I'm not waiting for their answer. Tonight we're bringing Pike in. I need to ask him some questions. Questions about what he did to me? About what he did to you and what he's done to others. Tessa, I need you to understand something. You're not his only victim. Based on what we've uncovered, there are at least 11 other women he's assaulted or coerced, probably more who were too scared to even try reporting it. The color drained from her face. 11? Oh my God. I'm going to find them. I'm going to document what he did. And I'm going to make sure every single one of them gets justice. He paused. But I need your help. When you're ready, and only when you're ready, I need you to tell me everything, every detail, no matter how small, every threat he made, every name he mentioned, everything you saw or heard. Tessa wrapped her arms around herself, careful of her ribs. He said things. While he was hurting me, he said I wasn't special. That girls like me think they're too good to do what's necessary, but he'd taught plenty of them otherwise. He said he had friends who made sure ungrateful bitches learned their place. Did he mention any names? Just one. He said Detective Caruso told him I'd been asking around about tenant rights, talking to some legal aid office. He said that's how he knew I was going to be a problem. She looked up at Dominic, her eyes haunted. He knew I was trying to find help before I even asked him for more time on the rent. It was like he was waiting for an excuse. Dominic's hands clenched into fists. Caruso hadn't just buried complaints. He'd been actively feeding information to Pike, helping him identify and target women who might fight back. You're safe here, he told Tessa. Pike can't get to you, and neither can anyone working with him. I promise you that. Why are you doing this? She asked again, the question she'd asked in the diner. You could just, I don't know, give me some money and forget about me. Why go to all this trouble? Dominic considered the question. The easy answer was that he had resources and power, and using them to stop a predator was simply the right thing to do. But the real answer was more complicated. Because I've spent 20 years building an empire on violence and fear, he said quietly. I've done things I'm not proud of, hurt people who probably deserved it, and some who didn't, and I can't undo any of that. But maybe I can make sure that in this city, in my city, women like you don't have to choose between safety and survival. Maybe that doesn't balance the scales, but it's a start. Tessa studied his face for a long moment. You're not what I expected when I saw you in that diner. What did you expect? Someone who'd look at me like I was pathetic. Someone who'd call the cops and forget about me before they even showed up. Someone who'd make me feel like what happened was somehow my fault. She shook her head slowly. Instead, you looked at me like I mattered, like I deserved help. I don't think anyone's looked at me like that in a long time. Before Dominic could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Package secured, en route to Pier 7. They had Harold Pike. Dominic stood. I need to go handle something, but I want you to think about the other women Pike mentioned. If you remember anything else, any detail, any comment he made, write it down. It might help us find them. What are you going to do to him? Tessa asked. Dominic looked at her, this broken young woman who'd found the courage to seek help even when help seemed impossible, and he made her a promise. I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. That's all you need to know. The warehouse on Pier 7 had been used for storage when Dominic's import business was legitimate. Now it served a different purpose, a place where problems could be addressed away from prying eyes and ears. The building was old brick and corrugated metal, isolated at the end of a long pier where the only sounds were water lapping against pilings and the distant call of seagulls. Inside, Harold Pike sat bound to a chair in the center of an empty room, lit by a single hanging bulb. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, balding, with the kind of face that looked mean even in repose. Right now, that face was twisted in fear and fury. Do you know who I am? He was shouting when Dominic entered. Do you know who protects me? You're making a huge fucking mistake. Dominic crossed the room slowly, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Pike's eyes went wide as he recognized him. You, Pike breathed. You're Varela, the guy from the diner. Jesus Christ, you can't just kidnap people. I got rights. Rights, Dominic repeated, pulling up a chair and sitting down facing Pike. That's an interesting word coming from you, Harold. Tell me, did the women you assaulted have rights? Did they get due process before you beat them? Did they get a fair hearing before you threatened to have them arrested or evicted? Pike's jaw worked, his face reddening. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Dominic's voice was calm, almost gentle. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Tessa Vale, ring any bells? That bitch came to you? She's a liar. The slap came so fast, Pike didn't see it coming. Dominic's hand cracked across his face, hard enough to snap his head to the side, hard enough to draw blood from his lip. Let's establish some ground rules, Dominic said, his voice still eerily calm. Rule 1, you don't call her a bitch. You don't call any of them bitches or liars or anything except what they are. You're victims. Rule 2, you're going to tell me the truth, all of it. Every woman you hurt, every threat you made, every cop you paid off. And Rule 3, if you lie to me, things get significantly worse for you. Do you understand these rules, Harold? Pike spat blood onto the floor. Fuck you. I want a lawyer. This isn't a police station. I'm not a cop. You don't get a lawyer here. What you get is a choice. Dominic leaned forward. You can tell me everything willingly, or I can make you tell me. One way is relatively painless. The other, he let the sentence hang. You can't do this, Pike said, but his voice wavered. Thomas Byrne won't let you. I work for him. I'm protected. Funny thing about that, Dominic said. I met with Thomas earlier tonight, asked him to cut you loose. Want to know what he said? Pike's face went pale. He wouldn't. I make him too much money. You made him money, past tense. But you also made him a liability. See, protecting you means protecting a documented serial rapist. That's bad for business. Dominic pulled out his phone and showed Pike the folder of evidence. Medical records, police reports, witness statements, financial records showing you paying off Caruso. I have everything, Harold. The only question is whether you cooperate and maybe walk away from this with your life, or whether you make this difficult and end up as fish food in the harbor. Pike stared at the evidence, his face crumbling as he realized the truth. He was alone. The protection he'd counted on was gone. The system that had enabled him had abandoned him. What do you want? He whispered. I want names. Every woman you assaulted or coerced, every location, every detail. Dominic set a recorder on the floor between them. And I want you to confess. All of it, on record. And if I do this, you'll let me go? I'll let you live. Whether you're free or in a cell is up to you. But Harold, the alternative to cooperation is that I let Marcus here have some time alone with you. And Marcus lost his sister to a man like you. He's been very patient, but his patience has limits. Marcus stepped forward from the shadows, and Pike flinched at the cold fury in his eyes. Okay, Pike said, his voice breaking. Okay, I'll talk. Just don't hurt me. Then start talking. And Harold, start with Tessa Vale. I want to hear you say what you did to her, and I want to hear you admit it was wrong. What followed was 3 hours of confession that turned Dominic's stomach. Pike talked, at first reluctantly, then with increasing desperation, as he realized confession was his only path to survival. He named women, described assaults, admitted to systematic coercion and violence. He detailed his arrangement with Detective Caruso, how he'd pay the cop to warn him about complaints and to intimidate witnesses. He confirmed everything Dominic had suspected and revealed horrors he hadn't. By the time Pike finished, Dominic had a complete picture of a predator who'd operated freely for over a decade, destroying lives with impunity because the system protected him and his victims had nowhere to turn. That's everything, Pike said finally, slumping in the chair. That's all of it. Can I go now? Dominic stood, picking up the recorder. No, now comes the restitution. What? You own a house. You have bank accounts. You have assets. You're going to sign all of it over. The house gets sold. The money gets divided among your victims. Every cent you have goes to helping them rebuild what you destroyed. That's everything I have. You can't just take everything? I can and I will. Marcus, bring in the papers. Marcus produced a stack of legal documents, transfers of property, access to bank accounts, a comprehensive confession that would hold up in any court. Sign them, Dominic ordered. And if I refuse? Then I release this recording to every news outlet in the city, along with all the evidence we've compiled. You'll be arrested, tried, and convicted. And in prison, Harold, men like you don't last long, especially when it's known what you did. Dominic leaned down until they were eye to eye. Sign the papers and disappear, or refuse and spend whatever's left of your miserable life being exactly what you turned those women into, powerless, terrified, and broken. Your choice. Pike's hand shook as he reached for the pen. One by one, he signed the documents, tears streaming down his face as he signed away everything he'd built on the suffering of others. When it was done, Dominic had Marcus remove Pike's restraints. You have 24 hours to leave this city. If I see you, if I hear about you, if you so much as breathe in the direction of anyone who lives here, this recording goes public, and you go in the harbor. Are we clear? Where am I supposed to go? I don't have anything now. That's the point, Dominic said coldly. Now you know how it feels to have nothing, how it feels to be powerless. Maybe you'll learn something from it, though I doubt it. You're a predator, Harold. Predators don't change. But you won't be preying on anyone in my city ever again. They left Pike outside the warehouse with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing knowledge that everything he'd built was gone. Dominic watched him stumble away into the night, a broken man who'd finally faced consequences. You think he'll actually leave? Marcus asked. He'll leave. Men like him are cowards. Without his protection, without his power, he's nothing. Dominic held up the recorder. And if he doesn't leave, we have everything we need to destroy him. Back in the SUV, Dominic called Dr. Reeves. I need you to start reaching out to the women on the list. Let them know Pike is finished and that there's money available for counseling, medical care, whatever they need to heal. How much money are we talking about? Everything Pike had, plus whatever I need to add to make it meaningful. These women deserve more than his scraps. His next call was to Thomas Byrne. It's done. Pike signed over everything and left town. Your liability is removed. You work fast, Thomas said, and there was something like respect in his voice. And Caruso? Is your problem to handle, but if he's smart, he'll retire quietly before I decide to make him my problem too. Consider it handled. Dominic? This doesn't change anything between our organizations. We're still competitors. I wouldn't expect otherwise. But Thomas? If I ever hear about another Pike operating under your protection, we're going to have a much different conversation. Understood. For what it's worth, I'm not sorry to see him gone. He was useful, but he was also a monster. Maybe it's time we stop pretending those two things can coexist. After the call ended, Dominic sat in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on him. They'd won. Pike was gone. His assets were being redistributed to his victims, and the system that protected him had been exposed and dismantled. But winning didn't feel the way he'd expected. It didn't feel triumphant or satisfying. It felt heavy, sad, like a tragedy that should never have happened in the first place. "You did a good thing tonight," Marcus said quietly. "I did the minimum thing. The thing that should have been done years ago by people whose actual job it was to protect those women." Dominic rubbed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. How many other Pikes are out there, Marcus? How many other predators operating with protection we don't even know about? We can't save everyone, Dom. No, but we can save the ones we find. And maybe if we make enough noise, if we make it clear that predators won't be tolerated anymore, maybe the next Tessa Vale won't have to drag herself into a diner at 3 in the morning hoping someone gives a damn. They drove back to the safe house so Dominic could update Tessa. He found her awake, pacing carefully despite her injuries, too anxious to sleep. "It's over," he told her. Pike confessed to everything. He signed over his house and his assets to be distributed among his victims. And he's left the city. He won't be coming back. Tessa sank onto the couch, her hand pressed to her mouth. "It's really over? It's really over. You're safe. And more than that, you're going to be compensated. The money from Pike's assets, split among all his victims, should be enough to help you get back on your feet. Maybe go back to school if that's what you want." "I can't believe this," she whispered. "Yesterday I thought my life was over. I thought I'd always be running, always be scared, and now you get to decide what comes next, on your terms, without fear." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since he'd met her, they weren't tears of pain or terror. They were tears of relief, of release, of a burden finally lifted. "Thank you," she said. "I know I keep saying it, but thank you. You gave me my life back." "You gave yourself your life back," Dominic corrected gently. "You're the one who walked into that diner asking for help. You're the one who survived. You're the one who's going to heal and move forward. I just removed the obstacle." As he drove away from the safe house, Dominic felt something shift inside him. The cold thing in his chest that had driven him for so long, the anger, the cynicism, the certainty that the world was irredeemably dark, had cracked just slightly. Maybe there was room in his world for something other than violence and power. Maybe he could be more than just a well-dressed monster. Maybe, for the first time in 20 years, he could be someone who protected instead of destroyed. It was a strange feeling, uncomfortable, unfamiliar, but not entirely unwelcome. The discovery came 3 days later, buried in the financial records Marcus had been methodically combing through. He called Dominic at 7 in the morning, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "We missed something big." Dominic was already awake, had been for hours, unable to shake the feeling that Pike's confession had been too easy, too complete. Men like that always held something back, always had one more secret buried beneath the ones they revealed. "Tell me," he said, setting down his coffee. Pike's bank records show regular payments to a shell company called Meridian Property Holdings. I traced it back. It's owned by Vincent Caruso and 2 other cops. But that's not the worst part. Meridian owns 4 apartment buildings that Pike managed, buildings we thought belonged to the Byrne family. Dominic's hand tightened on the phone. Caruso owned the buildings? Partial ownership, but yes. Which means he wasn't just taking bribes to bury complaints, he was directly profiting from Pike's operation. Every time Pike coerced a woman into paying rent in other ways, Caruso was getting his cut. Marcus paused. "Dom, if Caruso was this deep in it, he's not going to just walk away. Pike leaving town makes him vulnerable. He's going to try to cover his tracks." "How would he do that?" "By eliminating anyone who could connect him to Pike's crimes. And right now, the person who can hurt him most is Tessa," Dominic finished, already moving toward the door. "Get to the safe house, now. I'm 10 minutes out." He made it in 7, driving through morning traffic with a recklessness that would have gotten anyone else pulled over. His mind raced through worst-case scenarios, each darker than the last. Caruso was a 20-year veteran of the police force with access to databases, resources, and the kind of institutional knowledge that made him dangerous. If he'd decided Tessa was a threat, he'd know how to find her. The safe house looked normal as Dominic pulled up, quiet, undisturbed, the guard's car still in the driveway. But something felt wrong. The guard should have been visible through the front window, should have acknowledged Dominic's arrival. Dominic drew his gun and approached carefully. The front door was closed but unlocked. Inside, the house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that came after violence rather than peace. He found the guard in the kitchen, slumped against the wall with a bullet hole in his chest. Dead, but still warm. This had happened minutes ago, maybe less. "Tessa," Dominic called out, moving through the house with his weapon raised. "Tessa, if you can hear me, make a sound." The bedroom upstairs was empty. The bed made, her clothes still in the closet. The bathroom showed signs of a recent shower. She'd been here, had probably been getting ready for the day when a crash from the basement made him freeze. The safe house had a basement, reinforced and soundproof, designed as a panic room if anyone ever breached the upper floors. Tessa must have heard the guard being shot and run. Dominic moved to the basement door, listening. He could hear voices now, one male, one female. Caruso had found her. "I don't want to hurt you," Caruso was saying, his voice echoing up the stairs. "I just need you to understand something. Harold Pike was a criminal, and criminals lie. Whatever he told Varela about me, it's not true. I'm a cop. I protect people." "You protected him." Tessa's voice was shaking but defiant. "You helped him hurt women, and you made money from it. I saw the records. Dominic showed me everything." "Dominic Varela is a mobster and a killer. You really think he's the good guy here? He's using you to get at me, to damage the police department. Once he's done with you, he'll throw you away like garbage." "He's done more to help me in 3 days than the entire police department did in 3 years, Tessa shot back. "I filed 2 reports about Pike. 2. And both times, officers came to my door and told me to drop it. One of them said if I kept making trouble, I'd regret it. Was that you? Did you threaten me?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Dominic eased down the stairs, staying close to the wall, his gun steady. He could see them now, Caruso at the bottom of the stairs, his service weapon drawn, and Tessa backed into the corner of the panic room, holding what looked like a heavy wrench she'd grabbed from the tool cabinet. "Put the wrench down," Caruso said. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "You're going to kill me anyway," Tessa said. "At least this way I go down fighting." "I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to arrest you for filing false reports and for conspiracy with a known criminal organization. You'll spend the next 10 years in prison, and by the time you get out, no one will remember Harold Pike or care about what happened to some waitresses." "That's your plan? Frame her?" Dominic stepped into view, his gun aimed at Caruso's head. "Detective, I'd strongly suggest you lower your weapon." Caruso spun, his gun swinging toward Dominic, but he was too slow. Dominic had already closed the distance, disarming him with a brutal efficiency born of decades of violence. The gun clattered to the concrete floor, and Caruso stumbled backward, his hand going to his empty holster. "You killed my guard," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. "You broke into my property. You threatened my witness, and you did it all in a police uniform, which makes it worse." "I'm a cop," Caruso said, trying to recover his authority. "You assault me. You're assaulting an officer of the law. You're a dirty cop who's been covering up sexual assaults for profit. The law stopped protecting you the moment you betrayed your oath." Dominic kicked Caruso's gun across the room, out of reach. "Tessa, are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said, though she was shaking badly. "He shot David." "The guard. He just walked up and shot him." "I know, I'm sorry." Dominic kept his gun trained on Caruso. "Marcus is on his way. We're going to handle this." "You can't handle this," Caruso said, recovering some of his confidence. "I'm a decorated detective. You think you can make me disappear like you did Pike? The entire department will come down on you. The entire department is going to have its hands full explaining how one of their detectives owned property with a serial rapist and took bribes to bury assault complaints." Dominic smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "See, I've been documenting everything. Every payment you received from Pike, every complaint you buried, every building you profited from. And I've been very careful to make sure copies of all that evidence are with people who will release it if anything happens to me or to Tessa." Caruso's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You want to test that theory? Because I'm happy to call the FBI right now and turn over everything I have. If Financial crimes, civil rights violations, racketeering, they'll put you away for 20 years minimum. If you had real evidence, you would have already gone to them. I didn't go to them because I wanted to give you a chance to do the right thing, to retire quietly, turn in your badge, and disappear. But you chose to come after Tessa instead. You chose to kill an innocent man. So now we're past the point of mercy. Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs, his gun drawn, his face grim when he saw his cousin David's body in the kitchen. He's dead? Yeah, Dominic said. Caruso killed him. Marcus's hand tightened on his weapon, and for a moment Dominic thought he might actually shoot the detective right there. But Marcus had better control than that. He came down the stairs slowly, his eyes never leaving Caruso's face. David had 3 kids, Marcus said quietly. 3 kids who are going to grow up without a father because you needed to cover your ass. It was self-defense, Caruso stammered. He reached for his weapon. David's weapon is still holstered, Dominic observed. I checked. So that's another lie to add to your list. Caruso looked between them, seeming to realize for the first time how much trouble he was actually in. What are you going to do to me? We're going to let the system handle you, Dominic said. The real system, not the corrupt one you've been hiding behind. Marcus, call Agent Sarah Chen at the FBI. Tell her we have a dirty cop, a dead witness protection guard, and enough evidence of corruption to keep her busy for months. You're seriously turning me over to the feds? Caruso's voice cracked. You're a criminal. You kill people. I never claimed to be a good man, Dominic said, but I keep my word. I told Tessa she'd get justice. Real justice, not the fake kind you've been peddling for years. So yes, detective, you're going to face trial. You're going to be held accountable for every life you helped destroy. They'll offer me a deal. I'll give them bigger fish. I can give them the Burns, their whole operation. The Burns already cut ties with Pike's operation. They're clean on this. But even if they weren't, you think your testimony as a corrupt cop is worth anything? You're toxic, Caruso. No prosecutor is going to touch a deal with you. The FBI arrived within the hour. Not a regular response team, but Agent Sarah Chen herself, a woman Dominic had worked with before when their interests aligned. She was smart, ruthless, and had no patience for dirty cops. Mr. Varela, she greeted him formally, though they both knew their relationship was more complicated than that. You called about a corrupt detective in a homicide? Detective Vincent Caruso shot and killed David Reeves, a security guard in my employ. He did it while attempting to intimidate a witness in an ongoing sexual assault case. I have documentation of Detective Caruso's involvement in a criminal enterprise with Harold Pike, including financial records showing Caruso owned property that Pike used to target vulnerable women. Agent Chen's eyebrows rose. That's quite an accusation. It's quite a lot of evidence. Dominic handed her a flash drive. Everything's on there. Bank records, property deeds, Pike's confession implicating Caruso, witness statements from multiple victims. I've been thorough. She pocketed the drive, then looked at Caruso, who was now handcuffed and sitting on the basement stairs. Detective Caruso, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of David Reeves. You have the right to remain silent. This is a setup, Caruso shouted. Varela's a mobster. He probably killed Pike and now he's framing me. Harold Pike is alive and well in Nevada, Agent Chen said calmly. We've already located him. He's been very cooperative, especially when we explained that cooperation was his only path to avoiding federal charges. He's confirmed everything about your arrangement, detective. The properties, the bribes, the complaints you buried. You're done. As FBI agents led Caruso away, Agent Chen turned to Tessa. Ms. Vale, I'm going to need your statement about what happened here today and about your assault by Harold Pike. I understand this is difficult, but your testimony is crucial. Tessa looked to Dominic, seeking reassurance. He gave her a small nod. I'll tell you everything, Tessa said. I want him to pay for what he did. All of them. Good. We'll do this downtown in a proper interview room. Mr. Varela, I trust you'll make sure Ms. Vale gets there safely? Absolutely. And Agent Chen, the other women Pike victimized, they're going to need protection too. Caruso might not have been working alone. Already on it, replacing all identified victims in protective custody until we're sure there are no other dirty cops involved. She paused at the door. This is good work, Dominic. Messy, and probably not entirely legal, but good. Those women deserve justice. They deserve more than justice. They deserve safety. Real safety, not the kind that depends on corrupt cops doing their jobs. After the FBI left with Caruso, Dominic sat with Tessa in the safe house living room while Marcus coordinated cleanup and called David's family. Tessa was shaking, the adrenaline finally wearing off, leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed. "He was going to kill me," she said quietly. "If you hadn't come. But I did come. And you fought back. You didn't freeze, didn't give up. You grabbed a weapon and you stood your ground." I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and fighting anyway. Dominic leaned forward, his expression serious. "Tessa, this isn't over. The FBI investigation is going to take months, maybe longer. You're going to have to testify, probably multiple times. It's going to be difficult." "I know, but I want to do it. Those other women deserve to see these men held accountable. And maybe if I testify, it'll help them feel safe enough to come forward too. Some of them already are. Dr. Reeves has been reaching out, offering medical care and counseling. Several women have agreed to speak with the FBI. Your courage is inspiring theirs." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't feel courageous. I feel broken." "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." Dominic stood, walking to the window. "I'm going to move you to a different safe house, somewhere even more secure. The FBI will have their own protection, but I want redundancy. And I'm going to have Marcus run background checks on every cop who's going to be involved in your case. Do you trust the FBI?" "More than I trust the local police, that's for sure. Agent Chen is solid. She won't let this case get buried." Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded in ways Dominic hadn't anticipated. The FBI's digging into Caruso's finances revealed connections to other corrupt cops, to property schemes in multiple cities, to a network of exploitation that stretched far beyond Harold Pike's personal crimes. The local news picked up the story, running headlines about police corruption and systemic failure to protect assault victims. Community activists organized protests outside the police station, demanding reform and accountability. The mayor promised investigations. The police chief resigned in disgrace. And through it all, Tessa healed. Her ribs mended, the bruises faded. She started physical therapy to rebuild her strength, started counseling to process her trauma. Dominic made sure she had the best care money could buy, and he visited regularly, checking on her progress. "You don't have to keep doing this," she told him one afternoon as they sat in the garden of her new safe house. "You've already done so much." "I'll decide when I've done enough," Dominic replied. "How's the therapy going?" "Hard, really hard. Talking about what happened, facing all the fear and shame, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. But it's helping. I can sleep through the night now without nightmares. I can think about the future without panic." "What does your future look like?" Tessa considered the question. "I want to go back to school, finish my degree, maybe study law or social work, something where I can help people who've been through what I went through. And I want to use the money from Pike's restitution to start fresh somewhere, not running away, just starting over in a place that doesn't remind me of him." "That sounds like a good plan." "What about you?" she asked. "What does your future look like?" It was a question Dominic had been asking himself more and more lately. His empire still demanded attention, shipments to coordinate, territories to maintain, rivals to manage. But increasingly, that world felt hollow, meaningless compared to the work he'd done helping Tessa and the other victims. "I don't know," he admitted. "For 20 years, my future has looked exactly like my past. More of the same. But lately, I've been wondering if there might be something else. Something better. You could do a lot of good with your resources and connections. You've already proven that. Or I could do a lot of harm. The difference is thinner than you might think." Before Tessa could respond, Dominic's phone rang. Marcus, his voice urgent. "We've got a problem. Thomas Byrne wants to meet. Says it's about a mutual threat." Dominic's jaw tightened. He'd hoped his business with the Byrne family was finished, but apparently not. "When?" "Tonight. Same restaurant as before. He says it's urgent." After making sure Tessa was secure, Dominic met Thomas Byrne at the Italian restaurant once again. This time, Thomas looked worried rather than merely cautious, his usual polished demeanor cracking around the edges. "Thank you for coming," Thomas said as Dominic sat down. "I need your help." Those 4 words, coming from Thomas Byrne, were remarkable. The two families had maintained their careful distance for years, neither asking favors nor offering assistance. This request meant something had gone seriously wrong. "I'm listening," Dominic said. Pike's confession to the FBI didn't just implicate Caruso. It implicated other people, people I do business with, people who are now very nervous about what else might come out. Some of them want to tie up loose ends. By loose ends, you mean witnesses. Specifically, they mean Tessa Vale. Word on the street is there's a contract out on her. $50,000 to whoever eliminates the problem before she can testify. Dominic's hand clenched into a fist on the table. Who put out the contract? I don't know. Could be one of Caruso's friends on the force trying to protect themselves. Could be someone from Pike's network we haven't identified yet. Could be any number of people who have reasons to want this case to go away. Thomas leaned forward. I'm telling you this because cutting Pike loose was the right call, even if it's causing me headaches now. But I draw the line at murdering witnesses. That's a line we don't cross. Some people already crossed it when they killed my guard. Which is why I'm here. You need more protection on that girl, and you need to find out who put out the contract before they find someone desperate or stupid enough to take it. Dominic stood. Thank you for the warning. I'll handle it. Dominic, Thomas called as he reached the door. The people we deal with, the world we operate in, it's built on violence. But there are rules. Lines that keep us from being complete monsters. Going after that girl after what she's already been through? That crosses every line. So whatever you need to do to keep her safe, you have my support. No strings attached. It was as close to an alliance as the two families had ever come, and Dominic recognized the significance. I'll remember that. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. Dominic moved Tessa to a third location, this one a penthouse apartment in a building he owned outright, with security that rivaled a military installation. He brought in additional guards, installed new cameras and alarm systems, and made it clear to everyone in his organization that protecting Tessa Vale was the top priority. Marcus worked his contacts, trying to trace the contract back to its source. The information came in pieces. A conversation overheard in a bar, a phone call intercepted, a money transfer tracked through shell accounts. Slowly, a picture emerged. The contract hadn't come from a cop or from Pike's network. It had come from someone Dominic hadn't even considered, Pike's younger brother, Robert Pike, a mid-level accountant who'd been handling money laundering for Harold's operation. Robert Pike filed a missing persons report on his brother 3 days ago, Marcus explained as they reviewed the evidence. Claims Harold disappeared and he's worried, but the real worry is that Harold's confession is going to expose Robert's involvement in the money laundering. He figures if Tessa can't testify, the case falls apart and he stays clean. Where's Robert Pike now? Living in Harold's old house, the one Harold signed over before he left town. Apparently Harold never told his brother about the transfer, so Robert's been squatting there, probably going through Harold's remaining possessions, looking for anything incriminating. Dominic smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then, let's pay Robert a visit. They found Robert Pike exactly where Marcus said he'd be, drunk and paranoid in his brother's former house, surrounded by boxes of documents he'd been frantically shredding. When Dominic and Marcus entered through the unlocked back door, Robert barely had time to react before Marcus had him pinned against the wall. You put a contract out on Tessa Vale, Dominic said, his voice calm despite the fury burning in his chest. That was a mistake. I don't know what you're talking about, Robert stammered. I'm just looking for my brother. He's missing, and I'm worried. Your brother is in Nevada, cooperating with the FBI, and you know it because you've been calling his phone every day begging him not to give them your name. Dominic held up his own phone, showing a log of intercepted calls. We've been monitoring Harold's phone. Every word you said about wanting to kill the waitress before she testifies. We have it recorded. Robert's face crumbled. Please, I didn't mean it. I was just upset, just venting. I would never actually hurt anyone. You put $50,000 into an escrow account tied to the contract. That's not venting. That's attempted murder. Dominic pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Marcus to release Robert, who collapsed into another chair shaking. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call off the contract. You're going to turn yourself in to the FBI and confess to money laundering and conspiracy to commit murder. And you're going to give them every detail about Harold's operation, every account, every property, every person involved. If I do that, I'll go to prison. Yes, you will, but you'll be alive. Whereas if you don't cooperate, if anything happens to Tessa Vale or to me or to anyone I care about, the recording of you ordering her death goes to the FBI and you spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison. Dominic leaned forward. Or you could always try running, but I'll find you. And when I do, prison will seem like a mercy. Robert Pike made the call to cancel the contract that night, then turned himself in the next morning with a lawyer and a full confession. Agent Chen was thrilled. Robert's information led to the exposure of an entire money laundering network that had been operating for over a decade. When Dominic told Tessa the contract had been canceled and Robert was in custody, she cried from relief and exhaustion. "When does it end?" she asked. "When do I get to stop looking over my shoulder?" "Soon," Dominic promised. "The FBI has everyone now: Harold, Caruso, Robert, and a dozen other people caught up in the investigation. Once they all plead out or go to trial, once the story is public and the system has been exposed, there won't be any reason left to silence you. You'll be able to testify safely and then move on with your life." "Will you still be part of that life?" The question was quiet, almost shy. "After all this is over, will I still see you?" Dominic hadn't expected the question, hadn't prepared an answer. The truth was, he'd been thinking about that too. About what came after, when Tessa didn't need his protection anymore, when the crisis had passed and they were just two people who'd met under terrible circumstances. "Do you want me to be?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. "You've shown me what real protection looks like, what real kindness looks like. I know what you are, what you do. I'm not naive about that, but I also know that you saved my life and you asked for nothing in return. That matters. I'm not a good man, Tessa. Maybe not, but you're a good man to me, and right now, that's enough." 3 weeks later, the case against Vincent Caruso went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, Harold Pike's testimony, statements from multiple victims, the recorded conversation about covering up crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Caruso was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Robert Pike pled guilty to money laundering and conspiracy and received 15 years. Harold Pike, in exchange for his cooperation, received 10 years in a minimum security facility and permanent exile from the state upon release. And Tessa Vale, along with 10 other women who'd found the courage to come forward, received a settlement from Meridian Property Holdings and the Byron family totaling $3 million, money that would help them rebuild their lives and move forward from the trauma. On the day the verdicts were announced, Dominic took Tessa to dinner at a quiet restaurant far from the courthouse and the media circus. She looked different now, healthier, stronger, the haunted look in her eyes replaced with something that resembled hope. "It's really over," she said, almost disbelieving. "They're going to prison. We're safe." "You're safe," Dominic confirmed, "and you're free to build whatever life you want now." "I've been thinking about that." Tessa set down her fork, meeting his eyes. "I want to use my share of the settlement to create a foundation. Something that helps other women who've been through what I went through. Legal support, counseling, safe housing. Everything I needed but couldn't afford." "That's a beautiful idea. I want you to help me run it." Dominic blinked, surprised. "Tessa, I know it's not your world, but you have connections, resources, and you understand how the system works. Most importantly, you care. I saw that from the first night. You could build something with me that actually makes a difference." He thought about his empire, about the violence and moral compromises that had defined his life for 20 years, thought about the cold satisfaction of power and the hollow victories it brought. And he thought about the moment in the diner when he'd caught a broken young woman and promised her safety, and how that single act had changed something fundamental in him. "I'll help you," he said, "however you need me." Tessa smiled, genuinely smiled, and in that moment Dominic saw the woman she was becoming, not a victim, not broken, but a survivor ready to build something meaningful from the ashes of her suffering. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to their story. But somewhere in that city, there were other women like Tessa, trapped in situations they couldn't escape, waiting for someone to care enough to help. And now perhaps someone would. The foundation took shape faster than Dominic had anticipated. Within 2 months of the verdicts, Tessa had secured nonprofit status, leased office space in a renovated building downtown, and begun reaching out to the other women from Pike's case. She worked with a determination that bordered on obsession, as if building something good from her suffering was the only way to make sense of what had happened. Dominic watched her transform from survivor to advocate with something close to awe. She'd hired a small staff, a legal coordinator, a counselor, and an administrative assistant, and together they'd created a support system that addressed every gap Tessa had encountered when she'd needed help. Free legal representation for housing disputes and assault cases, emergency grants for women fleeing dangerous living situations, partnerships with therapists who specialized in trauma, a hotline that actually answered. They'd named it the Veil Foundation, and its mission was simple: ensure that no woman had to stumble into a diner at 3 a.m. hoping someone would care. "We've got our first outside case," Tessa announced one morning, entering Dominic's office at the foundation with a file folder. He'd taken a position as security director, a role that let him leverage his connections while maintaining distance from his other business. Woman named Carmen Ruiz. She's being harassed by her landlord, same pattern as Pike. Late rent, inappropriate propositions, threats of eviction. Dominic took the folder, scanning the details. Carmen was 31, single mother of 2, working as a nurse at the county hospital. Her landlord, a man named Stuart Vance, owned a dozen apartment buildings in the manufacturing district. The complaints followed a familiar pattern: missed maintenance, arbitrary fees, and increasingly aggressive demands for payment in forms that had nothing to do with money. "Has she gone to the police?" Dominic asked. "She tried. They told her it was a civil matter and suggested she hire a lawyer." Tessa's expression was grim. "She can't afford a lawyer, which is exactly what Vance is counting on. Set up a meeting. I want to hear her story directly." Carmen Ruiz came to the foundation office 2 days later, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she sat across from Dominic and Tessa. She had the exhausted look of someone working double shifts and still falling behind, dark circles under her eyes, and worry lines that aged her beyond her years. "Thank you for seeing me," she said quietly. "I didn't know where else to turn. My sister saw an article about your foundation and told me to call." "You did the right thing," Tessa assured her. "Tell us what's been happening." Carmen's story spilled out in fragments. Vance showing up at her apartment unannounced. Comments about how a woman like her could make things easier on herself. Hints that he could reduce her rent if she was friendlier. When she'd complained to the property management company, she'd been told Vance was an independent contractor, and they couldn't control his behavior. When she'd fallen behind on rent after her car broke down, Vance had become aggressive, cornering her in the hallway, making explicit offers. "Last week, he let himself into my apartment while I was at work," Carmen said, her voice shaking. "My kids were at school, thank goodness, but he was just there when I got home, sitting on my couch. He said he wanted to talk about my late payment, but the way he looked at me—" She stopped, wiping her eyes. "I can't afford to move. I've looked at other places, but the security deposits are too high and my credit is shot from medical bills when my son was sick last year. I'm trapped." Dominic recognized that trapped feeling, had seen it in Tessa's eyes that first night. It was the look of someone who'd exhausted every legitimate option and found them all closed. "You're not trapped anymore," he said. "We're going to handle this." "How? I can't prove he's harassing me. It's his word against mine." "Then we'll get proof," Dominic said, "and we'll make sure Stuart Vance understands that harassing tenants comes with consequences." Over the next week, Dominic had Marcus run surveillance on Vance. What they found was worse than Carmen's complaint suggested. Vance wasn't just targeting her. He had a pattern spanning years, across multiple buildings, with at least 6 other women reporting similar harassment. Like Pike, he'd found a system that worked and exploited it ruthlessly. Unlike Pike, Vance didn't have powerful protection. He was a small-time operator, a predator who'd slipped through cracks in the system but hadn't bothered building the kind of network that would shield him from exposure. That made him vulnerable in ways Pike never had been. Dominic scheduled a meeting with Vance under the guise of representing a client interested in purchasing one of his buildings. They met at a coffee shop, Vance arriving in a cheap suit and cheaper cologne, already counting his commission before he'd even heard the offer. "Mr. Varela," Vance greeted him with an oily smile. "I appreciate you reaching out. Always happy to discuss business opportunities." "I appreciate you making time," Dominic said pleasantly. "Though I should clarify, I'm not here to buy property. Vance's smile faltered. Then why? I'm here to discuss Carmen Ruiz. The name landed like a punch. Vance's face went white, then red, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and fear in rapid succession. I don't know who that is, he said, starting to stand. Sit down, Mr. Vance. Dominic's voice carried no threat, just certainty. If you leave this table, I'll release documentation of your harassment to every news outlet in the city before you reach your car. So I suggest you sit and listen. Vance sat, his jaw working soundlessly. Carmen Ruiz is a tenant in one of your buildings, Dominic continued. You've been harassing her for months, entering her apartment without permission, making inappropriate propositions, threatening her housing security. We have documentation of this, including recordings from surveillance equipment Mrs. Ruiz installed after your last visit. That was a lie. Carmen hadn't had the money for surveillance equipment, but Vance didn't know that, and the fear in his eyes suggested he believed it. I never touched her, Vance said quickly. I might have made some comments, but nothing illegal. You entered her apartment without notice or permission. That's trespassing. You demanded sexual favors in exchange for reduced rent. That's extortion and attempted sexual coercion. You targeted a single mother because you thought she was vulnerable. That's predatory behavior. Dominic leaned forward. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to waive all of Carmen Ruiz's back rent. You're going to return her security deposit. You're going to transfer her lease to a property management company that doesn't employ you. And then you're going to resign from managing all residential properties and find a new line of work. You can't make me do any of that. I can't. But the news media can make your life extremely uncomfortable. The housing authority can investigate every building you manage. The IRS can audit your taxes. And all the other women you've harassed can file a class action lawsuit that will tie you up in court for years. Dominic pulled out his phone, showing Vance a document listing 6 other women, along with dates and details of their complaints. This is just what we found in 1 week. How much more do you think we'll find if we keep looking? Vance stared at the list, the fight draining out of him. He wasn't Harold Pike, didn't have Pike's connections or resources. He was just a small-time predator who'd never expected to face consequences. What if I refuse? He asked weakly. Then I make 1 phone call, and your life becomes very public very quickly. Your choice. It took 3 days for Vance to comply with every demand. Carmen received written confirmation that her back rent was forgiven, her security deposit returned, and her lease transferred to a reputable management company. Vance submitted his resignation to the property owners he contracted with, citing health reasons. When Dominic informed Carmen, she broke down crying in the foundation office, clutching the paperwork like it was a winning lottery ticket. I can't believe this is real, she sobbed. I thought I'd have to just endure it, just survive until my kids were older and I could afford to move. I never thought anyone would actually help. Now, that's why we're here, Tessa said, putting an arm around her shoulders. So women don't have to endure it alone. The success with Carmen's case brought others. Women who'd seen the news coverage of Pike's trial, who'd heard about the foundation, who'd been suffering in silence and suddenly saw a possibility for help. They came in steadily at first, then in increasing numbers. Domestic violence victims seeking emergency housing, women fighting eviction, single mothers dealing with predatory landlords, immigrant women being exploited by employers. The foundation expanded to meet the demand. Tessa hired more staff, opened satellite offices in neighboring counties, established partnerships with law firms willing to take cases pro bono. Dominic used his connections to identify corrupt landlords and employers, to gather evidence that legitimate authorities could use for prosecution. It was during this expansion that the first serious threat emerged. Marcus brought the information to Dominic late one evening, his expression troubled. We've got a problem, a big one. Dominic looked up from the grant proposal he'd been reviewing. The foundation was seeking funding to expand their emergency housing program, and he'd been trying to make sense of the bureaucratic language required for nonprofit applications. What kind of problem? The Kovac brothers. They've been asking questions about the foundation, about you, about why you're suddenly so interested in protecting women from their business partners. Dominic's hand tightened on the pen he was holding. The Kovac brothers, Dmitry and Alexei, ran human trafficking operations throughout the region, specializing in exploiting immigrant women through fake employment agencies and fraudulent visa sponsorships. Dominic had always maintained distance from their operations, finding the trafficking business distasteful even by his elastic moral standards. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests they see the foundation as a threat. You've been shutting down their recruitment pipeline. Women who would have been desperate enough to fall for their schemes are getting help from the foundation instead. They want you to stop. Or what? Or they'll make it clear that helping vulnerable women is bad for your health. Dominic set down the pen, his mind already working through scenarios. A direct confrontation with the Kovacs would be bloody and destructive. They had manpower and connections to international criminal organizations. But backing down meant abandoning the foundation, abandoning women who needed help, abandoning the first meaningful thing he'd done in years. Set up a meeting, Dominic said. Neutral ground. I'll talk to them. Dom, these aren't reasonable men. They're not going to negotiate. Then I'll make them understand that threatening the foundation is bad for their health. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse near the docks, the kind of location that had hosted countless criminal negotiations over the years. Dmitry and Alexei Kovas arrived with 6 armed men, a show of force designed to intimidate. Dominic arrived with Marcus and 2 of his most trusted enforcers, deliberately understating his own strength. Dominic Varela, Dmitry greeted him, his accent thick, his smile predatory. We hear you've become a philanthropist. Very admirable. I've been helping women who need it, Dominic said evenly. I didn't realize that was controversial. Helping women is fine, Alexei said, his English better than his brother's. But you're interfering with our business. Women who would work for us are instead running to your foundation. This costs us money. Women who would be trafficked by you are instead getting legitimate help, Dominic corrected. If that costs you money, maybe you should find a new business model. Dmitry's smile vanished. We're not asking you to shut down your little charity. We're telling you, stop interfering with our recruitment or we'll shut it down for you. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Buildings burn, Alexei said casually. Staff members have accidents. Women in safe houses get found. These things happen. The threat was clear, and Dominic felt the old familiar rage building in his chest. But he kept his voice calm, controlled. Let me make something equally clear, he said. The foundation is under federal protection. The FBI has taken an interest in our work after the Pike case. Any attack on our facilities, our staff, or our clients will bring federal investigation down on whoever's responsible. And I'll make sure the FBI knows exactly where to look. You'd bring the feds into our world? Dmitry looked genuinely shocked. That's not how things work, Varela. It is now. The old rules, the code that said criminals don't cooperate with law enforcement, those rules protected predators. They protected men like Harold Pike and Vincent Caruso and you. I'm done playing by rules that shield monsters. You're making a mistake, Alexei said coldly. A very expensive mistake. No. You're making the mistake by assuming I care more about maintaining peace with you than I do about protecting vulnerable women. Test me if you want, but understand that if anything happens to the foundation, to any of our staff, to any woman under our protection, I'll dedicate every resource I have to destroying your operation, and I'll start by giving the FBI everything I know about your trafficking network. The warehouse went silent except for the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. The Kovac brothers exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them. You've changed, Varela, Dmitry said finally. The man we knew wouldn't threaten to rat to the feds. The man you knew didn't have anything worth protecting. Now I do. And I'll burn this entire city down before I let you take it away. The meeting ended without violence, but Dominic knew it wasn't over. Men like the Kovacs didn't respond well to threats, and they didn't back down from challenges to their authority. He increased security at all foundation locations, hired additional guards for the safe houses, and made sure every staff member knew the threat was real. 3 days later, someone threw a brick through the foundation's main office window at 2 a.m. The attached note was simple. Last warning. Tessa wanted to call the police. Dominic stopped her. The police won't help, he said. The Kovacs have connections in the department, and even if they didn't, a threatening note isn't enough for protection. Then what do? We make it clear that threatening us has consequences. What followed was a carefully orchestrated campaign of exposure. Dominic reached out to his contacts in the media, providing them with information about the Kovac brothers' trafficking operation, locations of suspected safe houses, names of victims who'd escaped, financial records showing money laundering. He made sure the information came from anonymous sources, untraceable to him or the Foundation. Within a week, news outlets were running exposés on human trafficking in the region. Federal agencies launched investigations. Immigration enforcement raided several properties connected to the Kovacs. The brothers found themselves under intense scrutiny, their operation disrupted, their profits threatened. The message was clear. Attacking the Foundation brought heat. Backing off made the heat go away. It took another 2 weeks, but finally Dmitry Kovac reached out through an intermediary. He wanted to negotiate a truce. They met again, this time in a public restaurant with witnesses, both sides understanding that the rules had changed. "You've made your point," Dmitry said stiffly. "We underestimated your commitment to this foundation. And I hope you understand that commitment means I'll protect it by any means necessary. We'll stay away from your operations. We'll find women elsewhere. But Varela, this vendetta ends. No more feeding information to the feds." "I'm not conducting a vendetta. I'm running a nonprofit organization that helps vulnerable women. As long as you stay away from our clients and our facilities, I have no reason to pay attention to your business. But if you come at us again, I won't hesitate to finish what I started." Dmitry nodded slowly. "Agreed. But you should know, other people are watching what you're doing, other people who don't like how you've changed the rules. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you threaten women under my protection. Maybe they'll learn to leave well enough alone." After the Kovacs backed down, the Foundation's work accelerated. More women came forward. More cases were resolved. More predators found themselves exposed and facing consequences. Tessa's vision of a comprehensive support system was becoming reality, and Dominic found himself increasingly invested in the work. But it was the personal toll that surprised him. Working at the Foundation meant confronting stories of suffering and exploitation daily. It meant looking into the eyes of women whose lives had been destroyed by men who'd never faced consequences. It meant carrying the weight of knowing that for every woman they helped, there were countless others still trapped. One evening, after a particularly difficult case involving a teenager who'd been trafficked by her own family, Tessa found Dominic sitting alone in his office, staring out the window at the city lights. "You okay?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I've spent 20 years in this city," Dominic said quietly. 20 years running an empire, making deals, building power. And I never saw this. Never saw the suffering that was happening right under my nose. You see it now. I see it because you showed me. That night in the diner, when you asked for help, you showed me that all the power and resources I'd accumulated meant nothing if I only used them to build more power. You showed me there was another way." Tessa was quiet for a moment. "I think we showed each other. You gave me back my life, and I gave you a reason to use yours for something more than just survival. Do you ever regret it? All of this? The Foundation, the threats, the constant fight?" "Never. Every woman we help, every predator we stop, that's a life changed. That's someone who won't have to go through what I went through. How could I regret that?" Dominic turned from the window to look at her. Over the past months, he'd watched her transform from a terrified victim to a fierce advocate. She'd found her purpose in the suffering, had built something beautiful from the ashes of trauma. And somewhere along the way, he'd realized his feelings for her had evolved beyond protectiveness or admiration. He'd fallen in love with her strength, her compassion, her absolute refusal to let her suffering be meaningless. "Tessa," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something." She smiled, that knowing smile that suggested she'd already guessed what he was going to say. "I know. You know what? I know how you feel. I've known for a while now. The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. The way you check on me even when there's no threat. The way you light up when I walk into a room." She stood, crossing to his desk. "And I need you to know that I feel the same way. I'm not a good man, Tessa. The things I've done, the life I've lived." "I know who you are," she interrupted. "All of who you are. The violence and the kindness, the power and the protection. And I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to be honest with me." "I love you," Dominic said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth but right in his heart. I didn't think I was capable of feeling this way anymore, but you changed that. You changed everything. Tessa leaned across the desk and kissed him, soft and gentle, a promise of something better than either of them had known before. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. I love you too, and I trust you. Not because you're perfect, but because you've proven that when it matters, you choose to protect instead of destroy. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to their story. But inside that office, two people who'd met in the worst possible circumstances had found something neither had been looking for: a partnership built on trust, a love forged in fire, and a shared purpose that gave meaning to their future. The Foundation's work continued, the threats continued, and the battles continued. But now they faced them together, two broken people who'd learned that sometimes salvation comes not from escaping your past, but from using it to build something better. The months that followed brought a rhythm to their lives that neither Dominic nor Tessa had experienced before. The steady, purposeful rhythm of building something that mattered. The Foundation flourished, helping dozens of women each month, and their relationship deepened in quiet moments stolen between crises and triumphs. But it was on a cold November morning, 6 months after their confession in the office, that everything nearly came apart. Dominic was reviewing financial reports when Marcus burst through the door, his face ashen in a way that made Dominic's blood run cold. "It's Tessa," Marcus said. "Someone grabbed her outside the office 20 minutes ago. 2 men, black SUV, no plates. Security footage caught it all." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Dominic was on his feet before Marcus finished speaking, his mind racing through possibilities, each worse than the last. "The Kovacs? I don't think so. The footage shows professional work, coordinated, quick, no hesitation. This wasn't street thugs, this was a planned operation." "Show me." The security footage was damning in its efficiency. Tessa had been leaving the office to grab lunch when 2 men approached from opposite directions, boxing her in. One grabbed her arm while the other opened the SUV door. She'd struggled, tried to scream, but they had her inside within seconds. The whole abduction took less than 15 seconds. Dominic watched it 3 times, memorizing every detail: the men's builds, their movements, the timing. "Run the footage through facial recognition. I want to know who they are within the hour." "Already on it, but Dom, there's something else." Marcus pulled up a new window on the computer, showing an email sent to the Foundation's general inbox 30 minutes ago. "They want you to see this." The message was brief. "We have Tessa Vale. If you want her back alive, you'll shut down the Foundation permanently and leave the city. You have 48 hours to decide. If you contact law enforcement, she dies. If you try to find her, she dies. If you don't comply, she dies. This is not a negotiation." The email was untraceable, sent through multiple proxy servers, the digital equivalent of a ransom note made from cut-out letters. Whoever had taken Tessa knew what they were doing. "This isn't about money," Dominic said, his voice eerily calm despite the rage building in his chest. "This is about shutting us down. Someone wants the Foundation gone badly enough to risk kidnapping. The question is who? We've made a lot of enemies in 6 months. Dominic's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, putting it on speaker. "Mr. Varela." The voice was male, professionally neutral, with no identifiable accent. "I trust you received our message." "I did. Let me talk to Tessa." "That's not how this works. You don't make demands. You listen, and you comply, or the woman you love dies slowly and painfully. Do you understand?" "I understand you've made a mistake. A fatal one." The voice actually laughed. "You think you're in a position to threaten us? We have her. We control whether she lives or dies. You have no leverage here." "You're wrong about that. See, I know who you are. I know who sent you. And I know that whoever's paying you didn't tell you the whole story about who you're dealing with." Dominic's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. "You have one chance to walk away from this. Let Tessa go unharmed, and I'll let you live. Keep her, and I'll find you. And when I do, what I did to Harold Pike will look like mercy." Big words from a man with no cards to play. 48 hours, Varela. Clock's ticking. The line went dead. Marcus was already pulling up data on his laptop. "I'm running the voice through analysis software, cross-referencing with known criminal networks. But Dom, even if we identify who has her, Finding where they're keeping her in 48 hours. We have less than that. The 48 hours is misdirection. They'll move her or kill her much sooner to prevent exactly what we're trying to do. Dominic paced the office, his mind working through scenarios. This level of coordination requires funding and planning. Whoever's behind this has resources and motivation. Who have we hurt badly enough that they'd risk this? Could be anyone. Vance, the Kovac, someone connected to Pike or Caruso. No. Vance is too small time and the Kovac's already backed down. This is someone else. Someone we haven't directly confronted yet, but who sees the Foundation as a threat to their operation. The facial recognition software pinged. Marcus pulled up the results, and Dominic felt his blood freeze. The two men who'd grabbed Tessa were Victor Petrov and James Sullivan, professional kidnappers and enforcers who worked for the Marquez cartel. The Marquez organization ran drugs and weapons through the port, but their real money came from a sophisticated money laundering operation that funneled cash through legitimate businesses, including several property management companies and employment agencies that exploited vulnerable women. The Foundation's legal work exposed 3 companies connected to Marquez operations, Marcus said, pulling up case files. We got restraining orders against them, froze their accounts pending investigation, and turned over evidence of fraud to the state attorney general. We cost them millions and put their operation under scrutiny. And now they're striking back. Dominic's hands clenched into fists. They think taking Tessa will make me back down. They're wrong. Dom, the Marquez cartel is different from anyone we've dealt with before. They have international reach, unlimited resources, and they don't play by any rules. If you go after them, if I don't go after them, Tessa dies. That's not an option I'm willing to consider. Dominic pulled out his phone and made a call he'd hoped never to make. Agent Chen, I need your help. Sarah Chen arrived at the Foundation office within the hour, her expression grim when Dominic explained the situation. You're asking me to help you conduct an illegal rescue operation against a major cartel organization, she said. You understand I can't officially support that. I'm asking you to help me save an innocent woman's life. What you can officially support is irrelevant. If I get involved and this goes wrong, it'll destroy my career. If you don't get involved and Tessa dies, you'll have to live with knowing you could have saved her. Dominic met her eyes. I'm going after her regardless, but I'd rather do it with your help than without it. Agent Chen was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. The FBI has been investigating Marquez operations for 2 years. We know they have several locations in the city where they conduct off-books business. If they're holding someone, it'll be at one of those sites. She pulled up a map on her tablet, marking 4 locations. Warehouse on the South Docks, an abandoned factory in the industrial district, a private estate outside the city limits, and a supposedly defunct shipping company near the harbor. Those are your best bets. 4 locations, maybe 48 hours, but probably less. We need to move fast and smart. Dominic studied the map. Marcus, I want surveillance on all 4 locations within the hour. Look for anything unusual, increased security, recent activity, anything that suggests they're holding someone. What about the 48-hour deadline? Agent Chen asked. It's a lie. They'll kill her or move her long before that to prevent exactly what we're doing, organizing a response. We have maybe 12 hours, probably less. Marcus had teams moving within 30 minutes, experienced men who knew how to conduct surveillance without being detected. They reported back in stages over the next several hours, and slowly a picture emerged. The warehouse and factory showed no unusual activity. The private estate was heavily guarded, but showed no signs of recent arrivals. But the shipping company, supposedly defunct but still maintaining minimal security, showed fresh tire tracks, lights on in buildings that should have been dark, and 2 men matching Petrov and Sullivan's descriptions entering the main office. That's where they're holding her, Dominic said with certainty. The question is how many people are guarding her, and how we get her out without getting her killed. Frontal assault is suicide, Pras, Marcus said. The Marquez cartel doesn't take prisoners, and they won't hesitate to kill a hostage if they're cornered. Then we don't corner them. We make them think they're in control until the moment we strike. Dominic turned to Agent Chen. Can you get federal agents positioned nearby? Close enough to respond if things go wrong, far enough that the cartel doesn't detect them? I can have a tactical team on standby. But Dominic, if you're planning what I think you're planning, it's incredibly dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous, but doing nothing is more dangerous for Tessa. The plan came together over the next 3 hours. Dominic would approach the shipping company alone, ostensibly to negotiate Tessa's release. While he kept the cartel's attention focused on him, Marcus would lead a small team to infiltrate the building from the waterside entrance, locate Tessa, and extract her. Agent Chen's FBI team would remain in position to intercede if the situation deteriorated into open warfare. It was risky, relied on timing and luck in equal measure, and had a dozen points where everything could go catastrophically wrong. But it was the best chance they had. As night fell, Dominic drove to the shipping company alone, parking his car in the open lot and walking toward the main building with his hands visible. He'd left his gun behind. Going in armed would only escalate the situation, and wore a wire that would let Marcus track his position. 2 armed guards met him at the entrance, patting him down professionally before escorting him inside. The building's interior was exactly what you'd expect from a defunct shipping operation. Empty offices, dusty equipment, the smell of salt water and rust. But in the back, lights blazed from what had once been a supervisory office. Inside, a man in his 50s sat behind a desk, expensive suit incongruous with the shabby surroundings. Dominic recognized him from FBI files. Carlos Marquez himself, the head of the cartel, a man who'd built an empire on violence and corruption. "Mr. Varela," Carlos greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm surprised you came alone. Most men in your position would bring an army. Most men in my position would have called the police. I'm not most men." Dominic remained standing, refusing the offered chair. "Where is she?" "Straight to business. I respect that." Carlos gestured, and one of the guards opened an interior door. Through it, Dominic could see Tessa, alive and apparently unharmed, sitting in a chair with her hands bound. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by renewed rage at seeing her restrained. "As you can see, she's alive and well. Whether she stays that way depends entirely on you. You want me to shut down the foundation and leave the city. That's not going to happen. Then she dies, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself." Carlos leaned back in his chair. "You've become a problem, Mr. Varela. Your foundation has disrupted my business, cost me money, and drawn unwanted attention from federal authorities. I can't allow that to continue. The foundation helps vulnerable women. If that disrupts your business, maybe your business deserves to be disrupted. Spare me the moral posturing. You're a criminal, same as me. You've killed, stolen, corrupted. The only difference between us is that you've decided to play hero for some waitress who stumbled into your life. But heroism is expensive, Varela. And tonight, you're going to learn just how expensive it can be." Dominic's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "I want you gone. The foundation closed, assets liquidated, you and your people out of the city within a week. In exchange, the girl lives, and you get to walk away with your life. Refuse, and she dies here tonight, and I'll spend the next year systematically destroying everything you've built. And if I agree, what guarantee do I have that you'll honor the deal? You don't, but you have my word for whatever that's worth, and you have the knowledge that if you refuse, she definitely dies. At least this way she has a chance." In Dominic's ear, Marcus's voice came through the concealed earpiece. "We're in position. Tessa's location is marked. Give us the signal, and we'll extract her." Dominic met Carlos's eyes across the desk. "You made one critical mistake in all of this." "What's that?" "You assumed I'd negotiate. You assumed I'd trade the foundation for Tessa's life, that I'd have to choose between them. But you're wrong about that. I'm not here to make a deal." Carlos's smile faded. "Then why are you here?" "To keep you talking while my people get Tessa out." The office erupted into chaos. Guards reached for weapons, but Dominic was already moving, diving behind the desk as gunfire shattered the air. In the back room, Marcus and his team crashed through the waterside window, cutting Tessa's bonds and pulling her toward the exit, even as guards rushed to intercept them. Dominic grappled with Carlos, keeping him between himself and the guards, who couldn't shoot without hitting their boss. The cartel leader was stronger than he looked, landing a solid punch to Dominic's ribs that drove the air from his lungs. But Dominic had spent 20 years fighting for his life, and he used every dirty trick he knew, eye gouges, throat strikes, anything to gain an advantage. FBI, drop your weapons! Agent Chen's voice boomed through the building as tactical teams flooded in, their arrival perfectly timed to coincide with the rescue attempt. The guards, caught between Dominic's team and federal agents, hesitated just long enough for Marcus to get Tessa clear of the building. Carlos Marquez tried to run, but Dominic tackled him, driving him to the floor and pinning him there until FBI agents arrived to slap on handcuffs. "You're finished," Dominic told him, breathing hard. "Not just here, but everywhere. Agent Chen has everything. Your money laundering operation, your exploitation network, all of it. You're going to prison for the rest of your life." "You think this changes anything?" Carlos spat blood onto the floor. "You think you've won? There will always be men like me, always be women to exploit. Your precious foundation is just a bandage on a wound that never heals. Maybe, but it's a bandage that saves lives, and every life saved is a victory, no matter how small." Dominic stood, stepping back to let the FBI take over. "Enjoy federal prison, Carlos. I hear they don't treat cartel bosses very well there." Outside, Dominic found Tessa wrapped in a blanket, talking to paramedics but refusing to get in the ambulance. When she saw him, she broke away from them and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck despite the pain from her bound wrists. "You came for me," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I knew you would, but I was so scared." "I'll always come for you," Dominic promised, holding her tightly. "Always. No matter what. They said they'd kill you if you tried to rescue me. They said you'd have to choose between me and the Foundation. There was never a choice. I'd burn the whole world down before I let them hurt you." Agent Chen approached, her expression a mixture of exasperation and grudging respect. "That was the most reckless rescue operation I've ever seen. You're lucky it worked." "It worked because we planned it properly and executed it well," Dominic said, "and because you positioned your people perfectly. Don't try to butter me up. You put a federal agent in an impossible position and forced me to choose between my duty and doing what was right. That's not something I'll forget. But you chose right. That's what matters. This time, don't make it a habit." She looked at Tessa, her expression softening. "Ms. Vale, you're safe now. Marquez is in custody, and his entire organization is being rolled up as we speak. The threat to you and the Foundation is over." The aftermath took weeks to fully process. Carlos Marquez was charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, money laundering, human trafficking, and a dozen other federal crimes. His organization collapsed under the weight of FBI investigation, with dozens of arrests spanning multiple states. The properties and businesses he'd used to exploit vulnerable women were seized, their operations shut down permanently. The Foundation not only survived, but grew stronger. The publicity from Tessa's kidnapping and rescue brought national attention to their work, resulting in major donations and grant funding. They expanded to 3 more cities, opened 2 new safe houses, and hired additional staff to handle the increased caseload. But for Dominic and Tessa, the real changes were more personal. 2 months after the rescue, on a quiet Sunday morning, Dominic found Tessa in the Foundation office, reviewing applications for their new scholarship program, an initiative to help women who'd survived exploitation return to school and build new careers. "You're here early," he said, setting down 2 coffee cups on her desk. "Couldn't sleep. Too excited about tomorrow." Tomorrow was the Foundation's 1-year anniversary, marked by a gala fundraiser that had sold out weeks in advance. Can you believe it's been a year since that night in the diner? Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Both, I think. Tessa accepted the coffee gratefully. "I was thinking about Carmen this morning. She called yesterday. She got promoted to head nurse at the hospital. And Maria, the woman we helped last month, she started her own business. And Jen—" "I know," Dominic said gently. "I know about all of them. You keep me updated on every success story, because they matter. Each one is proof that what we're doing works, that women can rebuild their lives when someone gives them a chance." She set down the coffee, turning to face him fully. "You gave me that chance. You gave all of us that chance. We gave each other chances. You showed me there was more to life than power and survival. You showed me that I could use everything I'd built for something good." "I have something to tell you," Tessa said, a nervous energy in her voice. "I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I finally made a decision." Dominic felt his chest tighten. What kind of decision? I'm stepping down as director of the foundation. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? Why? Tessa, this is your dream, your purpose. It is, and it always will be. But I've realized something over the past year. The foundation doesn't need me to run day-to-day operations anymore. We have amazing staff, solid funding, established processes. What the foundation needs is someone to expand it, to take it national, to build partnerships, and secure major funding. She smiled. And what I need is to finish what I started, my degree, my education, the future I put on hold when my mom got sick. You want to go back to school? I want to get my degree in social work, then my master's, maybe a doctorate. I want to study the systems that allow exploitation to happen and develop better ways to prevent it. The foundation will always be part of my life, but I need to grow beyond it too. Dominic pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'm proud of you. Terrified of running this place without you, but proud. You won't be running it alone. I'm not disappearing, I'm just changing roles. I'll still be on the board, still be involved in major decisions. I'll just be doing it while also building the knowledge and credentials to make an even bigger impact. When do you start? Fall semester. I've already been accepted to State University. Full scholarship from our own foundation, ironically. She laughed. I'll be one of my own success stories. The gala the next evening was a triumph. The ballroom was packed with donors, supporters, journalists, and women the foundation had helped. Carmen Ruiz attended with her children, proudly introducing them to everyone. Several women who'd testified against Harold Pike and Vincent Caruso came, no longer victims but survivors ready to celebrate their victories. Tessa gave a speech that brought tears to eyes throughout the room, talking about the night she'd stumbled into a diner broken and terrified, and how one man's decision to help had changed everything. The Vail Foundation exists because someone cared when I needed it most, she said, her voice strong and clear. Because Dominic Varela looked at a broken waitress and saw someone worth saving. But more than that, he saw someone worth empowering. He didn't just rescue me. He gave me the tools to rescue myself and to help rescue others. That's what this foundation does. We don't just provide temporary relief. We provide permanent transformation. When it was Dominic's turn to speak, he kept it brief. A year ago, I thought I knew what power was. I thought it was control, money, the ability to make people afraid. But Tessa taught me that real power is the ability to lift people up, to give them safety and opportunity, to help them reclaim their lives from those who would destroy them. The Vail Foundation isn't my achievement. It's hers, and it's yours. Every person in this room who believed that vulnerable women deserve better than a system that fails them. Thank you for believing. Thank you for supporting this work. And thank you for helping us build something that will outlast all of us. The gala raised over $2 million, enough to fund expansion plans for the next 3 years. But for Dominic, the real victory came later that night, when he and Tessa stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the city that had witnessed both their lowest moments and their greatest triumphs. I love you, Tessa said, leaning against him. Not because you saved me, but because you showed me that being saved was just the beginning. You showed me I could be strong, could build something meaningful, could turn suffering into purpose. I love you too. You changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. You made me want to be better than I was, do better than I'd done. You made me believe that redemption was possible, even for someone like me. So what happens now? Tessa asked. You've dismantled your criminal empire piece by piece over the past year. You've turned your resources toward legitimate business and the foundation. You've become something you never thought you could be. Where do we go from here? Dominic pulled a small box from his pocket, and Tessa's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. We go forward, he said, together. Not as a crime boss and a victim, but as two people who found each other in the darkness and built something bright. Tessa Vail, will you marry me? Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, unable to speak, and when she finally found her voice, it was strong and certain. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony attended by close friends, foundation staff, and some of the women whose lives had been changed by their work. Carmen was there, and Maria, and a dozen others who represented the real legacy of what had started that night in the diner. Agent Sarah Chen attended, off-duty and smiling, having become a friend in the years since the Pike case. Even Marcus, who'd been Dominic's right hand through 2 decades of criminal enterprise, stood as best man, proud of what his friend had become. The wedding wasn't in a church. Neither of them had much use for traditional religion, but in the Foundation's main office, surrounded by the work that had brought them together and the people whose lives had been transformed by it. I, Dominic Varela, take you, Tessa Vale, to be my wife, Dominic said, his voice steady. I promise to protect you, not because you need protection, but because love means standing guard over each other's dreams. I promise to support you as you grow into everything you're meant to be. And I promise to spend every day for the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the chance you gave me to be better than I was. I, Tessa Vale, take you, Dominic Varela, to be my husband, Tessa said, her voice clear and strong. I promise to love you not for saving me, but for showing me I could save myself. I promise to stand beside you as we build a life that matters. And I promise to never forget that from the darkest night came the brightest future either of us could have imagined. As they kissed, sealing vows that meant more than just legal commitment, the room erupted in applause. These were people who understood that love could be born from trauma, that strength could emerge from suffering, and that sometimes the most powerful transformations began with a single moment of compassion. 3 years later, the Vale Foundation operated in 12 cities, had helped over 5,000 women, and had become a national model for comprehensive victim support services. Tessa had completed her master's degree and was working on her doctorate while serving as the Foundation's chief advocacy officer, traveling the country to speak about exploitation and systemic reform. Dominic had fully transitioned out of criminal enterprise, using his considerable business acumen to run legitimate import/export operations while serving as the Foundation's executive director. The dock workers and warehouse operators who'd once feared him now respected him for the jobs he provided and the fair treatment he offered. Harold Pike had served 3 years of his sentence when he died of a heart attack in prison, unmourned and unremembered except as a cautionary tale. Vincent Caruso remained in federal prison, with 29 years left on his sentence. Carlos Marquez had been convicted and sentenced to life without parole. But the real victory wasn't in the punishment of evil men. It was in the lives rebuilt, the women empowered, the children who grew up with mothers who were safe and stable. It was in Carmen, now a hospital administrator, working to identify and help other victims of exploitation. It was in Maria, whose small business employed 3 other survivors, giving them income and independence. It was in the dozens of women who'd gone back to school, started careers, built families, and lived lives free from fear. And it was in Dominic and Tessa, sitting in their home office on a Sunday morning, reviewing applications for the Foundation's latest initiative, a program to help formerly incarcerated women rebuild their lives. Look at this one, Tessa said, showing Dominic an application. She served 8 years for a crime her abusive boyfriend forced her to commit. She's been out for 6 months, can't find work because of her record, about to lose her housing. Set up an interview. If she's willing to work, we'll help her build a new life. Just like that? Just like that. Everyone deserves a chance, Tessa. You taught me that. She smiled. That same smile that had captivated him 3 years ago, and leaned over to kiss him. We taught each other that. You and me, we built this together, and we'll keep building it. For as long as it takes, for as many people as we can reach. Outside their window, the city spread out before them, the same city where a broken waitress had once stumbled into a diner seeking help, where a hardened criminal had chosen mercy over indifference, where 2 unlikely people had found each other in the darkness and built something luminous. The story that had begun with violence and fear had transformed into something else entirely, a testament to the power of compassion, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. Dominic Varela had spent 20 years building an empire of fear. But in the end, his true legacy wasn't power or wealth or the ability to make people afraid. It was the thousands of women who slept safely because he'd chosen to protect instead of exploit. It was the predators who'd been stopped because he'd decided that some lines couldn't be crossed. It was the Foundation that would continue helping vulnerable women long after he was gone. And it was the love he'd found with a woman who'd shown him that even in the darkest night, even when all hope seemed lost, Sometimes a single act of kindness could change everything. That night in the diner, when Tessa Vale had fallen and Dominic Varela had caught her, neither had known they were beginning a story that would reshape both their lives and touch thousands of others. But looking back now, they understood that sometimes salvation comes not from escaping our circumstances, but from using them to build something better. Sometimes the most powerful transformation begins with a simple choice: to help instead of harm, to protect instead of exploit, to see the person in front of you not as an opportunity for gain, but as a human being deserving of dignity and care. And sometimes, against all odds and expectations, that choice leads not just to redemption, but to love, purpose, and a future brighter than either person could have imagined alone. The end of their story was really just the beginning of countless other stories of women helped, lives rebuilt, and futures reclaimed. And that, more than anything else, was the legacy that mattered.